Having said that, let's move along in the pressure. I voted for Trump. I think Trump is a smart guy. You may not love him. I think he's smart. Howard Lutnick, I like him. I think he's smart. I think they're smarter than me when it comes to these tariffs. And I also think he's playing a high stakes game here. I'm gonna roll with him for a couple days, couple weeks, and see how this pans out. But my impression of Trump, he makes big moves, big statements, sees how people play it off. The art of the deal is a moving thing. You know, Biden had years of incompetence. So your willingness to stand by or the rope that you gave him was not much, at least for me. It's like, oh, this guy sucks.
That's what Asmongold said, no? Well, Asmongold is implying that Trump was elected by and supported by a bunch of people who don't care about stocks or the economy to get back at people. That not in this way. That's just not true. Most of the people who voted for Trump are not okay with their 401ks tanking. That's just a delusional fantasy based on falling for propaganda online.
And he's proven it for 4 years. I'm going to give Trump the benefit of the doubt here. People saying hold tight, the market will rebound. I'm buying left and right. I don't think Trump's just going to go out here and tank the stock market. That tanks the economy. That's depression. I don't care if you're middle class working. People say, which, by the way, Trump's people never said. I've seen a couple, only rich people care about the stock market. No, you need a stock market to rip. You need it to be solid. If the stock market tanks, the economy's donezo. But I have faith. I'm not panicking. I don't think he's a crazy person, even though Bill Ackman, he's like, sometimes you want the world to think you're crazy. Do you? I don't know. I don't think Trump is crazy. That's the point. I think he's smart. I think he knows the markets can't tank forever. So I'll give him. Now, I almost tweeted out, Dave.
I know this isn't reality since people don't plan properly, but if you're in retirement, you should be mostly in bonds. The people hurting the most people 5 to 10 years from retirement? Maybe. I agree with you, but I mean, how many people are... Sorry, when I say maybe, I mean maybe and who's hurting the most, but how many people are actually doing significant rebalances of their portfolio as they approach retirement? I guess if you have like a good financial planner and stuff, you probably should be, but I'm curious how many people actually do that.
Joe Biden had the audacity.
President Biden being criticized for appearing to check his watch briefly during a ceremony for the 13 service members killed in Kabul last week.
Joe Biden was on the tarmac when the bodies were brought back to American soil, checking his watch.
Oh my fucking God.
Joe Biden had the audacity to actually check his watch, not once, but over and over again.
Looks like he was being inconvenienced by having to show some respect for these American heroes.
Check his watch during the dignified transfer of 13 troops. We all saw it.
What would he need to check the time on? Why would he do this?
As soon as I saw it, I paused the TV and I thought, is that what I thought I just saw? I am disgusted. And I just don't understand.
He is callous at base. That is what this man is. He simply does not care.
The remains of 4 American soldiers who died during a training exercise in Lithuania will be returned to the U.S. later today. President Trump is in Florida. He is not expected to attend.
Behest. At a golf tournament, okay? We watched this Hassan slop already. Oh, Sam Harris doing video.
Start with what the hell is going on? How's your stock portfolio, Sam?
Well, this is looking expensive. That was the, I just looked at the Economist cover story editorial, which was as bad as withering as you could imagine. They called the day of liberation, the day of ruination. And yeah, I mean, obviously I'm not an economist. I just know that the vast majority of economists think this is an insane self-inflicted wound. I guess time will tell, but it certainly seems that way. I mean, it's just crazy that one person's fixation on tariffs can accomplish this for us.
Weren't you and Sam supposed to do some sort of collaboration? We were going to, except every fucking millisecond, anything about Sam Harris comes up on stream, some fucking retard spams the same question 50 trillion times, so they decided not to. But maybe someday it'll happen. Who knows? We'll see. What is this? Eli Lilly, Novo stocks dive after Medicare excludes weight loss drugs. Why? Trump admin finalized new Medicare and Medicaid policies late Friday, but left out a key provision that would have expanded coverage for weight loss drugs. In response, Eli Lilly's stocks get it rip.
I don't know who really wanted this, but it's we seem to be running a global experiment on the economy, and could he be proven right in the end? I guess it's possible, but it's against the grain of seemingly all of economic understanding of the last 100 years.
Well, that's interesting you said that, because one of the things that we're hearing is this idea that you just have to wait, especially from the MAGA people that are, now into buy the dip. And
I think you said that you were pretty certain a recession is coming. I think it's likely, but how can you be so certain? Recessions have always been hard to predict. In my uneducated opinion, a recession is hard to predict because it's hard to know how flexible or how many different ways you could theoretically prevent a recession from coming on. Like, especially free market economies and governments can be very, very adaptive to different scenarios or situations. So people try, obviously, as much as they can to fight to keep the economy going. But it's a little bit different when you have a government that's trying to intentionally cause a recession. It's a different thing. Like, if the government really wants to, the government could cause a recession at any point in time, right? Oh, we're banning all imports, or we're going to make it illegal to go shopping, right? You could do it. So it's a bit different, I think, this time.
this is all going to be okay. I mean, they were griping about the price of eggs, right?
Yeah.
And now and now they'd give anything to pay $12 for eggs again. Maybe that's the move. But what do you? I mean, it sounds like you actually have a glimmer of optimism that.
No, zero optimism.
No.
I mean, I think it's very likely to be a disaster. I mean, Trump is a fake businessman, right? He's a fake business genius.
Oh my God, yes, this talking point. Trump has made his money because he was an actor. Trump is an entertainer. That's the only reason anybody knows who he is today. It's the only reason why he has any wealth today. It's because he was an actor.
Because he's a game show host. And somehow the country
was
decided
he was a good businessman.
A prominent. I mean, he's a famous for being famous.
Yes, his
nearly
brand is his
fake
brand.
real estate developer.
Yeah,
right. Who had a great talent for going bankrupt and losing other people's money, and then getting sued and not paying his subs, et cetera, right? The least ethical businessman anyone's ever met, and not a successful
not
one.
true, but
The irony is now he's probably a legitimate billionaire, at least for the next 5 minutes, because of the meme coin he sold to a credulous horde of people who bought it simply to support.
How long do we have for our first divestment or whatever, where they can dump the first? It was 3 months after the meme coin launched. Have we gotten to 3 months since then yet?
Support him, and now we have foreign governments that will be buying it to support him. In an exercise in corruption, the likes of which we have never lived through, at least to my knowledge, in this country. I mean, it's completely insane that this person's ideas about the economy are operative. But is it conceivable that all the economists are wrong and that tariffs are going to work, or that that he could pull back from the brink in a way and look like a winner because he just shocked all of our allies and enemies simultaneously? With how irrational he could be. I mean, that's totally possible. I mean, the irony for me is that it seems like an economic catastrophe is the only thing that stands a chance of convincing his cult that they made a bad decision. And I think it's legitimate to worry whether it would even convince them in that case. I mean, a global depression might not convince the 30% of Americans who are truly in the cult.
Don't need those people.
But, among the people I know who voted for Trump, who really, imagined that he, at a minimum, would steward the economy in ways that would be, if not advantageous for all of humanity, advantageous for them. I can imagine them recognizing that we all made a bad decision, or they made a bad decision in supporting him. If there's a sufficient economic downturn, the painful irony for me is that that's not the reason to have recognized how insane it is to have promoted this guy to the highest position of responsibility of anyone in our society. I mean, what's insane is that just before he shuffled out to the Rose Garden to announce these lunatic tariffs, he was meeting with Laura Loomer about national security in the Oval Office. That's what's insane about the Trump administration, right? We have grifters and lunatics and conspiracy theorists advising the president on how to manage, risk of nuclear annihilation with Russia and China and our other adversaries. I mean, it's just, and to say nothing of the fact that you've got RFK Jr. in there promoting anti-vaxxers and firing, half the staff of the FDA and who knows who else he's going to fire. It's madness, right? That's the thing to be agitated about, and the fact that there could be an associated price tag with it is all too foreseeable. But in my mind, if you're going to come to your senses just because your 401k took a nosedive, you still haven't pulled your head out of your ass.
The only thing Sam is missing here, which is strange because he got off Twitter and everything, although I imagine he's still probably a very politically in tune person, is most Americans just have no fucking idea. Like, about any of the shit he just mentioned, most Americans don't know who Laura Loomer is. Most Americans don't know anything about any of these like political processes at all or care.
This is a disaster on 100 fronts, and in 2 months, Trump has accomplished the unthinkable. He's ruined the reputation of our country. Perhaps for a generation. I mean, he's convinced our allies that they can't possibly trust us, right? Because they can't trust us, right? We elected a moral lunatic to the office, and he's rescinded all of our treaty obligations effectively, single-handedly, and he's acting like we lost a war with Russia, right? Like last I looked, we had won the Cold War. It seems like we've lost it now, or we switched sides at the 11th hour. And now he's doing the bidding of a dictator who seems to be, at the time we're recording this, seems to be playing him for a fool in the negotiations vis-a-vis the war in Ukraine. But who knows how that's going to come out. But the fact that we have announced to the world that we no longer stand with freedom-loving democracies that aspire to live the way we do in the developed world. We no longer stand with open societies against naked aggressors. We stand with aggressors because we
want to be aggressors.
The guy covered in orange face paint may want a hotel deal in Moscow one of these days. It's mortifying. Right, that's the thing to be agitated about, and so it's going to be.
All right, we get it.
It's just going to be an extra level of annoyance to see an economic calamity convince people finally that maybe this was a bad decision.
I want to go back to the signal situation with Hegseth. To me, and I want to get your thoughts on this. To me, that was the
full-length podcast, audio only. Your email and get access to the episode.
Welcome to the Making Sense Podcast. This is Sam Harris. We're trying something new here today. In this episode, I'm answering questions based on the topics that many of you submitted over on Substack. And if this goes well, we'll do more of this in the future. The voice you hear is that of my manager and business partner, Jaron Lowenstein. Jaron sat down with me to discuss the questions we fielded from the community chat at Substack. I think there were some 4,000 comments, so this is just the tip of the iceberg. But many of you have been calling for me to respond more quickly to topical events. So that is the experiment we're performing for you today. This is audio from the video that we recorded, and subscribers can watch the full video and comment and submit further topics over on my Substack page. Enjoy.
So let's start with what the hell is going on? How's your stock portfolio, Sam?
Well, this is looking expensive. That was this person's ideas about half the staff of the FDA, and he's acting like
the media will kill you. Don't ever. It was such an easy opportunity.
An orange face paint may want a hotel deal in Moscow one of these days. It's mortifying. right? That's the thing to be agitated about. And yeah, so it's just going to be an extra level of annoyance to see an economic calamity convince people finally that maybe this was a bad decision.
I want to go back to the signal situation with Hegseth. To me, and I want to get your thoughts on this. To me, that was it was such an easy opportunity for integrity. They could have still lied. They could have said nothing. There was nothing classified, but there was a fuck up, and we're looking into it. And one of us did this, and
integrity,
that shouldn't happen. That's embarrassing. And we do better. We know better. Or as you said, anybody would have been fired for that. Why is that? And going back to the Trump prerequisites that you talked about, is it possible? I'm purely making this up, although Griffin said that it was in his movie, I guess, The Apprentice.
Oh, I don't know what he's about to say, but the reason why you can never admit fault is because it's part of like the cult, right? Like if you're an actual literal god and you want your followers to see you that way, then you can't admit to ever like making a mistake, because why would a god make a mistake, right? It's a cult leader mentality. You can never fuck up.
Just there's a scene that he was talking about this. Is it possible that in Trump's pre-meeting he tells everybody, listen, if you fuck up, just double down. Like, don't ever, like, the media will kill you. Don't ever apologize.
Yep.
Just fucking lie, and stay through it, and just believe your story.
Yep.
And you'll get through it, and I'll back you up. But no need to, admit that. And then on that too, I mean, I saw, what's her name? Tommy Lauren had come out, who's she's a right-wing or Republican pundit, had come out and said, listen, guys, just take the fucking L on this. This is easy. Just take the L. Like, why couldn't they do that? Like, why was that such an easy opportunity? And we watched them on the other side ask for the same thing. Why is that so hard to have just one area where you could fuck up and just say, okay, look, it wasn't confidential. You can, again, keep your lie. But why is it? Why couldn't they? Is it just? I mean, I don't think these people all lack integrity. There must be something.
No, you can be sure they do. I mean, that's what he's selected for. I mean, no one passes through that sieve with integrity. It's well, I mean, it's a famous piece of advice that has been talked about. I'm sure it is in actually some of Trump's fake autobiographies that he didn't write, where Roy Cohn gave him the advice that you do never admit a mistake. Right? I mean, that's the and you just lie and change the subject and move on, but you never apologize. You never admit that you were wrong about anything, even when it's obvious to everybody. And it's part of a generic authoritarian or fascist playbook. I mean, paradoxically, the harder the lies are to believe, I mean, really the impossible lie,
the better the loyalty test it is.
Even better in this kind of environment, because it functions like a loyalty test, right? Like this is code for being in the cult, and what it does is it nullifies everybody's efforts to even understand what is going on in the world. I mean, this is Steve Bannon's point of flooding the zone with bullshit. It was Hannah Arendt's point in the origins of totalitarianism that a sufficient amount of lying is not it's not designed to get people to believe these falsehoods. It's designed to get people to believe nothing, right? It's to get them to declare
because the Democrats have already done it or whatever.
So they just realize, okay, who knows what's going on in the world? It's not my job to know what's going on in the world. I'm just going to be obedient to keep my head down. I'm just going to put a sign in the window claiming to believe the big lie, so that no one drags me out of my shop and beats me to death on the sidewalk, right? I mean, like that's where this heads when there are no checks on it, right? This is the history of fascism. And there's no question that Trump is an authoritarian. His every inclination is to govern as an authoritarian, and his lying is a principal part of that. I mean, he just lies about everything, and he lies in ways that are clearly not meant to successfully deceive anyone.
Yeah,
I mean, it's crucial to realize the difference, right? When Lance Armstrong is lying about doping, in the Tour de France, he is really trying not to get caught, right? He's just kind of doing the cognitive math, trying to remember what he said last time. He's applying pressure to people covertly.
There's also why I said, like, whatever lie they're telling, they will never, ever, 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 ever admit to that lie. Every lie that you've heard about Social Security or Elon and Doge and all that shit, these lies will be repeated forever. Republicans will never back. Even people 30, 40, 50 years from now, these lies will be repeated forever.
He's trying to keep secret whatever he can keep secret, right? He's having conversations behind closed doors. He is trying to get away with it, right? And to be believed. And then finally it all kind of smashes into an obstacle that he can't navigate, right? Which is the fate of many frauds and many liars. That is not what Trump is doing, and that is not what Trump has done for decades now. He lies in ways that are totally transparent, right? He'll tell you a building he built is 10 stories taller than it is, in fact, right? And all you have to do is stand outside and count the floors. It's all bullshit, right? And this is a fascist style. I mean, it doesn't matter when you're a fucking game show host, but when you bring it into a government, this is why people are worried about fascism, right? Because this is the fact that you can have half of a society claiming to believe the unbelievable is terrifying. I mean, this is so upside down. The right wing has been complaining about George Soros funding things.
Thank you on
right
this.
that are of interest to people on the far left.
And
that
Elon Musk
seems worth complaining about. But now look at what Elon is doing.
Yeah.
Who's complaining about that? And what Elon is doing is so much more intrusive, so much more corrupt, so much more a matter of self-dealing. I mean, he's getting regulators fired who are regulating his companies. right? I mean, it's
Elon is doing worse than what people even accuse Soros of doing, which Soros wasn't even doing. Like,
he's not even on the same part of the map as what George Soros has been accused of. And I'm not even sure that all the accusations leveled at Soros are true.
Yeah.
But assuming they are true, it's nothing like what Elon is involved in.
And you think there's no way to steel man Elon for at least his intentions at all at this point?
Don't do it.
Not at this point, because I know what he does when you point out his obvious errors, right? Errors that are really harming people's lives. He does nothing about it, right? He doesn't apologize. He doesn't correct them. He just tells you to go fuck yourself and he moves on.
Yep.
If we ever have, a full eruption of anti-Semitic intolerance in America or Western Europe again, if we really descend into something awful, much of the responsibility will be on Elon at this point because of what he's done on X, because how he's turned X into a platform for the world's anti-Semites. And it's not just anti-Semitism, it's white supremacy, it's fascism, it's every species of bigotry and awfulness. He has made it the preeminent platform for all of that. Not just the sentiment, but the conspiracy thinking and the lying and the distortion of reality that turbocharges all of it. And not only has he done that as a matter of tuning the algorithm and bringing the worst actors back on with great fanfare, bringing Nick Fuentes back.
Participating in it himself, retweeting the people that actually do it, like he's just as much involved in it as anybody on the platform is.
Back on, and Alex Jones, but he's done it in the way he's personally interacted with these accounts and passed on misinformation, right? Personally to over 200 million followers, and when any of this gets pointed out to him, he does not care, right? And so it's in that context that you have to see his Hitler salutes that no one thinks are Hitler salutes, right? And I don't even think they're Hitler salutes, right? I mean, it's crazy to think that he really was invoking that reference when he Zig Heiled twice. But the guy is always, if only by accident, promoting Nazis and far-right lunatics and conspiracists and liars, right? He's not accidentally amplifying trans activists and far-left conspiracists and liars. So to ascribe it to error seems pretty far-fetched. I mean, the error he's never making is to criticize the Chinese Communist Party, right? If he's just a bull in a china shop.
This is one of the most important points that I try to make to people is when people say, oh, well, like maybe this was a mistake, or, oh, well, maybe they messed up on this thing. When the mistakes are always in one direction, it's not a mistake. Mistakes are things that happen where you can mess up in a lot of different ways and you end up supporting or attacking things you shouldn't be, and it can happen in whatever way. But when you're always making mistakes in one direction, then it's not a mistake. It's intentional.
Making mistakes everywhere. Well, then he would make errors of that kind. He never makes those errors, right? He's only amplifying right-wing intolerance. And it's completely irresponsible. It's unforgivable at this point. And so, what could people do in response? I mean, the vandalism and violence directed at Tesla is obviously the wrong thing to be doing. I mean, one, it's illegal. Two, it victimizes innocent people who just bought a Tesla because they thought it was a great car, and it is a great car, right? It's like, just think of someone who stretched to buy a nice car and love the car until yesterday, and now people are hurling abuse at them or keying their car or worse, right? It's awful. Right? Like and whoever's doing that, I mean, these are almost certainly far left dummies. It's totally counterproductive. But what would not be counterproductive is a full-on boycott of Tesla, right? That would be, insofar as that's happening, I think that's an entirely good thing. It sounds like it's happening in Western Europe. I would love to see Tesla stock get beaten down to a plausible, price-to-earnings ratio, which is 1/10 of its current value, because I think that's, I think that would be a totally appropriate ethical response to what Elon is doing in the world, right? I mean, and it seems to be the only signal that could conceivably matter to him or anyone close to him, right? I mean, if you're going to imagine what it would take to rein him in, to have his board of directors, one of his board of directors rein him in, it would only be something like that. And I'm not even sure he would care at this point. He's got obviously many other irons in the fire beyond Tesla, right? He's got SpaceX, he's got other, he'll be spectacularly wealthy even if Tesla goes to zero. But it's the only lawful mechanism we have to resist his obviously unethical and I think probably unlawful behavior at this point.
Well, I want to talk about somebody who's responsible for that in large part, and somebody who may have gotten Trump elected, and somebody who I actually believe that you do believe has good intentions and is doing well and means well. And I wonder, I know that you're a friendship, and I'll tell you what it is in a second, but one of the things we're thinking about is, would you ever have Rogan on your podcast?
Yeah, I mean, it hasn't occurred to me, frankly. It would be a hard conversation at this point. I mean, I'm out of touch with Joe for, fairly obvious reasons, and that makes it difficult to think about how that conversation would go. Obviously, he's wandered pretty far into Trumpistan, not for real reasons of partisanship, but just based on the allergy I think all of us have had to the far left. But he's been very slow to acknowledge the significance of his platform for the quality of life of people everywhere. Really, I mean, he's got the world's largest media platform, very likely, and he doesn't seem to me to have admitted that to himself, and because it would require that he take more responsibility than he
any
has
responsibility,
to get his facts straight.
Any
he thinks
responsibility
that
whatsoever.
The alibi that he's continuously invoked, that he's just a comic, just having fun conversations, is good enough at this point to insulate him against valid criticism. And I just don't think that's the case. It hasn't been the case for a very long time. And insofar as I've communicated with him in recent years, I've tried to nudge him in the direction of correcting some errors or having some balance on his podcast. But I haven't done too much of it, frankly, because it seems like it doesn't accomplish anything. And I haven't wanted to blow up the relationship because I like Joe a lot, and I think he's a good person, but he's not serving a good role now on the information landscape. He's done some things that have been quite harmful. I think inadvertently. I think he's genuine. I don't think he's a bad actor in the way that I think Elon is now, because Elon knows what he's doing. Because it's been pointed out to him so clearly, and I've done it personally, and I know what his personal response to me is. Right? I've shown him exactly how he was defaming me. Right? And his response was, "Go fuck yourself." And I don't think I would ever get that back from Joe. I know I wouldn't. Right? If Joe said something about me on his podcast that was totally false and harmful to my reputation, and I pointed it out to him, there is absolutely no way his response would be, "Go fuck yourself." Right? Zero. The probability of that is zero. Right? Because I think Joe is a much different person than Elon. I'm just forced to admit now that I never knew Elon, right? Or that he's changed. There's been some wholesale firmware change in his brain in recent years. But I think he is absolutely a bad actor who has completely become unmoored, if he ever was moored ethically. I don't think Joe is like that. I think Joe is a genuinely good guy who wants good things for people, but he is honestly in over his head on so many topics of great consequence, right? When he brings someone on to just shoot the shit about how the Holocaust is not what you think it was, right? Or maybe Churchill's the bad guy in World War II. Or he's got Dave Smith, being treated as an expert on Israel and Palestine and the history of that conflict and the moral emergency that came to the world's attention on October 7th and what is appropriate to think in the aftermath of all of that, right? Dave Smith is the only reason why anyone knows what Dave Smith thinks about
it's because of Joe
any
Rogan.
of this is very likely because Joe had him on multiple times to talk about it, right? He's a pure misinformation artist, and on top of many others. And when Joe talks to someone like Trump or Tucker Carlson or any of these other guys who lie as freely as they breathe and doesn't push back against any of their lies, in fact, in Trump's case, really fairly energetically helped put his lies into the most plausible possible shape. It is irresponsible. I mean, it is directly harmful. Our society is as politically shattered as it is, in part because of how Joe has interacted with information.
Yep.
Again, I think a lot of this is inadvertent, or maybe all of it's inadvertent, but it is also avoidable, right? He could actually take the responsibility that really is his to take at this point to get his facts straight and have someone other than Jamie there riding shotgun with him. Where he could have two brilliant journalists whose full-time job,
every single episode.
He could pay each of them $1 million a year just to sit there and make sure he doesn't put his foot in his mouth in a colossally irresponsible way. It would be very simple to do a better job than he's doing, and he just doesn't seem to see any need for it, and yet the need is excruciating.
I do think he's
one thing I should point out is that Joe is only the most consequential case here because he's got the biggest platform, right? It's like if his audience was 1/10 the size, this would be 1/10 the problem, right? And then there'd be other people who would be worth talking about. I mean, this is just a general problem with podcasts and with the alternative media ecosystem. Some people, for whatever reason, based on their background or based on their tendencies, have internalized institutional norms, even when they're now outdoor cats in the independent media space, and other people haven't, right? So there are people who have real academic or journalistic norms guiding them, and they're just on Substack or they just have a podcast and they're doing good work. And then there are people who think they're acting like journalists and they're not, right? And this is something I've complained about with Lex Friedman, right? I mean, Lex is another very nice guy. I don't think he's ill-intentioned at all, but I mean, he's going to sit down with Putin, really, and conduct an interview. That's going to be useful for the world. I mean, that seems extraordinarily unlikely to go well. I would love Lex to prove me wrong there, but I saw how it goes when he talks to people like Tucker Carlson or Kanye West or any other controversial figure. So some of those conversations have been just disastrous founts of misinformation. So it is with the All In podcast guys, right? Like, I don't know, I only know Jason. I've met David Sachs once, but I can't say I know him. But I was a big fan of their podcast in the beginning when they were talking about just business stuff and entrepreneurship, and I mean, that was fun and useful, and I think they were giving a lot of valid information there to people. But once they got political, once they got deep into once David Sachs began spouting Kremlin talking points, quite literally Kremlin talking points, though he would roll his eyes at that description. And they were completely unencumbered by any valid journalistic or academic correction of this Dunning-Kruger effect that took hold over there.
I'm always saying this, we idolize billionaires in this country too much. Many of them, not all, but certainly Musk, are sociopaths that make a fortune screwing as many people over as much as possible, as long as possible. That's not true. The average billionaire in this country makes a lot of money because there's some product or thing that people obsessively like, and most of you guys enjoy it, and you just like pretend that you don't, because it's like the popular talking point. People can shit on Bezos all they want, but everybody loves Amazon Prime. Everybody loves next day shipping. Nobody liked to wait weeks or 7 days to ship a fucking product. Like, everybody likes people to buy everything from one place. You guys will say shit like this, but it's just not. That's just like the meme talking point. Find better criticisms. People don't even like Elon Musk because he's a billionaire. They liked Elon Musk because he represented like the autistic tech bro who is like, you know, like, oh, he's so cute. He's just like a little techie guy and he's trying to make the world a better place and blah, blah, blah. That's why people are obsessed with Elon Musk and for SpaceX and Tesla.
It's been a disaster, right? And they had Trump on and they had Tucker on, and these interviews were totally irresponsible, right? And I think quite politically consequential, right? I mean, when you look at all the legions of tech bros in Rogan's audience and in the All In podcast audience, and you know this vibe shift that took hold in tech, those two podcasts in particular, I guess I could add Lex to that, I think were largely responsible, right? And the normalization of supporting this personality cult in Trump. I mean, you know, Elon also played his role. It's been disastrous. And I'm not sure, again, apart from an economic catastrophe, I'm not sure what is going to break the spell. But the errors that these podcast hosts have been making are absolutely obvious, right? To any real journalist or any real academic touching any one of these subjects, the errors they're making are crystal clear and totally avoidable. And so, I mean, to do this job effectively, you know, as a member of the independent media, you still have to internalize the norms that made real journalism in the past.
Well, it depends on what your
right?
goal
And if you don't want
is.
to be a journalist, and you don't want to be an academic, and you don't want to be an intellectual, and you just want to be an entertainer, well, then don't interview Vladimir Putin, right? I mean, it's just insane to be subjecting our political process to that level of pollution in the information space. I mean, it's like, again, Joe's got effectively Holocaust deniers on his podcast at a moment where anti-Semitism has become more consequential than globally speaking than it has been since the Holocaust, right? I mean, that's his contribution to this moment. It is irresponsible.
So speaking of hosts that are not, I'll come at you pushing back. You got some shit for the Niall Ferguson podcast episode from the audience that you let him get away with murder. And I think there's something that's really great about you as a gracious host, which I'm sure you understand that they're doing the same, where I think people love you at your best is where you're gracious, but also ferocious. And I know we have Douglas Murray coming up, who's a friend and somebody that you also want to remain a gracious host to. What sort of steps are you going to take, or how do you think you'll prepare for that, or how do you think that's going to go? Or
well, I do think that the role of being a host imposes a little bit of a constraint that isn't present when you are a guest on someone else's podcast and you can debate freely, right? Like I remember, you know, in the first 100 or so podcasts I recorded, I didn't really see this constraint in the same way, and I would just let it rip with guests, and you know, I had some very famously bad podcasts. So they were good bad for some people, but they were bad for many others. I mean, they became really a slog because I just wouldn't let a point go, because I didn't think it should be let go, because it was a fresh piece of idiocy from this guest who wasn't making sense. But
objectively, do you have hopes for a market rebound and not temporary, of course? No. Unless something unprecedented happens. The question you have to ask is, will Trump roll back the tariffs? And right now, every indication from Trump is no. So then the question is what will it take to make Trump roll back the tariffs? And I don't know the answer to that question. So we know that, for instance, because this is how dictators work, and Trump is the exact same as that, he has nobody that will push back against him in the administration. I don't know if it was a political article or what, but I think I saw something recently. I think it was off stream, but people were saying there was like shockingly little amount of pushback inside the administration against Trump. In a way, you kind of saw this in the Signal chat leak, where was it Vance saying things like, oh, well, I don't know if this is good with Trump's agenda or blah, 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 but like, okay, let's go, let's do this. Although I guess that wasn't necessarily about pushback against Trump, that was pushback against Hegseth. But like, it seems like people are just like kind of going along with basically whatever. And if Trump does will something, like assuming he's willed it and people know his will on it, then it doesn't seem like anybody's going to do anything to stop it. So, what do you say? What do you do? It comes down to, what do we think will make Trump stop? And I don't know what the answer to that question is.
Those conversations really bogged down, and some shouldn't have been released, and one I tried not to release, but then the guest effectively executed a suicide bombing on me by publicly lying about what had happened on the podcast, so I wound up releasing it under the title the best podcast ever. So I do feel like I need to be a gracious or a semi-gracious host, no matter who I'm talking to, and if I can't manage that, I probably shouldn't be talking to this person on my podcast. I mean, maybe I could be debating them on somebody else's podcast. But
why does that, being a gracious host, not apply to Joe Rogan?
Well, no, being a gracious host doesn't mean you don't ask a single skeptical question, right? That you don't push back against an obvious lie.
How bad would the economy be before we get some pushback? I mean, we're already getting pushback from citizens, I think, are not happy. Lawmakers will probably not be happy. But remember, Trump is ruling like a dictator. Trump just signs executive orders and does whatever. Trump hasn't asked Congress for anything. Trump doesn't need Congress for anything. He's just doing whatever he wants as his own little executive duder. Like, that's it.
That you don't fact check somebody. I mean, that's to interview someone like Trump or Tucker Carlson.
Then why does Bezos pay his drivers the lowest hourly wage and the least benefits of any delivery service? He fired anyone that tries to unionize. They've acquired 240 companies since their inception to cut competition. I don't know if Bezos pays the lowest of any drivers. I don't think that's actually true. I thought Amazon had a 15 an hour policy for most of their stuff. I'm sure there are less or worse paying driving companies out there, number one. Number two, fired anyone who tries to unionize probably just doesn't like unions in his workforce. A lot of people don't like unions in their workforce, including a lot of lefties who that Nathan Robinson guy got in a huge thing. And I think the Young Turks had this pop up as well. You can criticize them for not liking labor unions. That's fine. I think that's fair. But I don't think that's evil.
People who have a history of lying that is so clear, you can't just flip on the microphone and assume this is going to be a good faith conversation, and you're now just going to amplify this person's preferred representation of themselves to your audience, right? That's genuinely irresponsible. I mean, if I couldn't really talk to President Trump on my podcast because I couldn't treat him with the requisite respect so as to make that a possible conversation, right? I mean, I think he's a purely malicious force in the world, effectively, right? I mean, even when he's just a clown, I simply do not respect him at all, really. I mean, so to have him on the podcast, I would have to honestly convey that, right? It would be an intervention from the first sentence. Now, I think one could argue that I shouldn't have guests like that on, right? And so it would be with Tucker, and a lot of people could name Candace Owens, right? I couldn't have Candace Owens on the podcast in any normal way, right? Because she's such a liar and a conspiracy freak at this point. So I have to deal with that. And so as polite as I would attempt to be, if I ever did such a thing, I would be trying to perform an act of surgery, informationally on this person, and that would become obvious very, very quickly. And that is the only responsible way to interview some of these people because they are such established bad actors. You can't have Vladimir Putin on your podcast and pretend that he's not a dictator who kills journalists and political opponents, because he's a dictator who kills journalists and political opponents, right? So if Lex is going to go into that interview and try to turn down the screws on him, which admittedly would be a very difficult thing to do in person, right? I mean, he's going to be sitting down with a dictator who kills journalists and political opponents, surrounded by guys with guns, presumably. And this is a guy who poisons political opponents in London with nerve agents and polonium, right? I mean, this is not, subjecting innocent bystanders in the UK to injury and death. This is not a normal interview, right? And to treat it like a normal interview would be patently insane. So yeah, Rogan should not interview Vladimir Putin if given the chance. Absolutely not, right?
What if he brings on somebody, a couple experts who can join him?
Well, yeah, but it's still his whole mode of like, we're just going to shoot the shit and we know we're both good guys here. That doesn't apply in this situation because Putin is not a good guy, right? That's so well established. It's just irresponsible to treat someone who is a malevolent psychopath as a potentially good person. It's just not real. And it has a consequence to tell tens of millions of people, to give them a fake insight into the humanity of this person, right? Like he's just a guy who he puts his pants on one leg at a time like the rest of us, that Vladimir Putin. No, he's a kleptocrat who's stolen probably over $200 billion from his increasingly impoverished country and threatened our country with nuclear annihilation. I mean, this is who you're talking to.
So back to Douglas for a second.
Douglas is, I mean, one of the reasons why I first of all, I love Douglas. I think Douglas is a fantastic voice in the world who I love to amplify despite how much hate mail I get on his behalf. We agree about many things. I think we disagree about some things. I think we disagree. It'll be interesting to see how much we disagree about how to navigate the tensions we're talking about now. I mean, how do you navigate personal relationships with people who are acting irresponsibly in public? And he's made some very different decisions than I've made on that front, perhaps out of political necessity. I would acknowledge he's in a difficult position. His audience is right of center almost entirely, and his audience is increasingly tainted by conspiracist morons and lunatics and liars and grifters and sociopaths, right, who are getting promoted to the top of this information ecosystem, and with whom he needs to pretend to play nice. And it's a real liability intellectually and ethically. Ben Shapiro's in a, but for the fact that he is Jewish, Ben would probably not be in the same situation. But because Ben is Jewish, right, he's now, he's having to dance around the anti-Semites in his midst because he's surrounded by them, right? I mean, how does Ben navigate the space of the Daily Wire now when the breakup with Candace Owens revealed?
I work at Amazon as a driver. USPS makes double the benefits and a higher hourly wage. UPS has paid pensions, double our top out hourly wage after 4 years. FedEx has a higher starting rate than our top out rate. List goes on. Then go work for one of those companies. What do you mean? Sounds like you should be working for one of them then, no?
To him in about as indelible a way as possible, just how many anti-Semites he had in his audience, right? Because they took Candace's side in that split. But he's, how does he share the stage with some of the right-wing grifters who grift from the anti-Semitic side of the pond. Ben and Douglas have to suffer that company in a way that I don't, right? I mean, Douglas now has to suffer the company of the people who are totally confused about the morality of the war in Ukraine because they got, J.D. Vance and his politics coursing through their veins, or David Sachs and his politics, right? And so it is with Israel and Gaza, right? I mean, there's no one who has his head screwed on straighter with respect to Ukraine or Israel and Gaza than Douglas, right? He knows exactly which way is up there. He knows that Putin is on the wrong side of both of those conflicts, but he's surrounded by people who are confused, right, or pretend to be confused. And he has to make common cause with them, or seemingly has to make common cause with them on other topics, right? And I don't have to play that game. I'm very grateful I don't have to play that game. But the downside of my approach to these things is I'm fairly actively burning bridges with people who used to be friends, or used to be colleagues, or used to be acquaintances who were almost friends. And Douglas has I think Douglas and I have talked about this briefly. As a point of principle, he has decided never to close doors really with anyone. He has I think he's quoting, I forget who, Roger Scruton or somebody who was a mentor figure for him. It's just like when you close a door, don't close it all the way. I forget what he said there, but he just has a view of this that is it may be more realistic in the end, in my view. I mean, I have a fairly.
Don't you think that forces UPS or FedEx to decrease their labor costs to keep up? It's a race to the bottom. Yeah, corporations race to the bottom to pay lower wages, and workers race to the top to get higher wages. This is a natural tension between an employee and an employer. Yeah, right? Yes.
Idealistic, uncompromising view about the personal ethics entailed here. When someone lies enough and they're unrepentant enough and they behave like a sociopath long enough, at a certain point, I'm going to cut my losses and say, all right, this is, and this is happening sooner and sooner now, especially when the person is acting in public to great consequence, right? I mean, there are people who have dysfunction in their lives and for whom you, I think, need to be really forgiving of human frailty, right? If I had a friend who did something awful and, would I go visit him in prison? Yeah, I mean, that's a very likely outcome of that kind of case, right? But here we're talking about friends who have podcasts that reach millions of people, or friends who, are breaking bread with the current president of the United States and helping to amplify his message, right? Or cutting him checks for $1 million and going to the inauguration. It's a very different kind of responsibility. So I'll get into all of this with Douglas, but Douglas and I agree about many things of consequence, and that, I'm not expecting real fireworks. I'm expecting some interesting disagreements.
Wow. Dave Smith tried to fight that point, but ends up proving it with the clip that he posts. What is this?
Simple. That was like, look, if you listen to what Daryl said on Tucker's podcast, he essentially goes, I say this sometimes to get a rise out of my buddy, who's like an Anglo-Saxon, and I'm kind of being hyperbolic when I say it, but I kind of say it to prod, but in some ways I think Churchill was the real villain of the war. Now, he didn't commit the most atrocities. I'm not saying he was the worst person there, but I think he's primarily responsible for this not being maybe like a little conflict in Poland and turning into like the big bloodbath that it did. Okay, say whatever you will about that. There's a fair argument to be there. I tend to think Daryl's right, but maybe
Wait,
he's
isn't
not.
this the same clip we just watched? Or?
But every single person who repeated that would go, he said Churchill was the real villain. And you're like, you know what, dude, we're not doing that. He goes, I say this sometimes to get a rise out of my buddy.
Well, no, wait.
Right?
Okay.
That anymore. Like, we're not very fine people on both sides in this whole thing.
Right.
Like, come on, dude.
Right.
No, that's not what he fucking said. And you could take out all that other content, but any honest person looking at that just goes like, no, that's not what he said. And, and I was on Piers Morgan's show, one more shout out to Piers, but it even.
You said in the clip, you tend to agree with it. Oh,
more.
Sure. Okay. All right. I don't care. God, friends completely sold on the bond debt refinance master plan. Have you looked into it? No, and it sounds retarded. Ask them to explain it. And my guess is they won't be able to.
Shots here. Yo, what's up? Oh my God. Y'all better be putting that Palestine flag emote right now. That should be the only thing you guys have out there. Nice to meet you. Also, fuck Infinity. Fuck Destiny. Fuck Side David.
Thank you.
Based.
On a day known as Liberation Day,
President Donald Trump just dropped a bomb.
Carnage on Wall Street. Markets falling, tumbling.
Stocks plunging down, down, down. The Nasdaq's getting crushed. Small caps are getting crushed.
This is a shock to the system.
It is ugly out there. Worse than worst case scenario. Stocks are getting slashed and burned. $2.5 trillion vaporized.
It is estimated that the average American family will pay more than $5,000 out of their pocket to pay for these tariffs.
Economic tariffs on the entire world. The U.S. officially launched one of the most aggressive trade policies in modern history, putting a 10% tariff on all imports across the board. China got hit with 34%, Vietnam 46%. Even the European Union is facing a 20% tariff. Now the message is clear. America wants to bring production home.
Why would I watch this video? Is he just going to explain what we've already...
Secure its supply chains and assert its dominance. Now, the people who support this say this is needed to protect national security and rebuild American industries. But critics argue that we should get ready to pay higher prices, trade wars, and global economic fallout. But there might also be a twist ending to this story. Now, these tariffs could be deflationary. They could cause the U.S. economy to slow down enough to force the Fed to lower interest rates and rescue the economy, which would allow the U.S. to refinance its debt and send the markets to the moon. Now, all of this sounds kind of crazy. There's a lot of fear and confusion out there, and I want to help explain how this will reshape everything from your portfolio to the future of the global monetary system.
Okay.
This is Democracy Watch. Mark, we're obviously watching as the economy is turning upside down. Markets are in free fall right now as the result of Donald Trump's misguided tariffs. But there's actually a much more insidious reason that he's imposing these tariffs that you and I have spoken about, and I want you to talk about that right now.
Yeah, so look, I think that a lot of the legacy media is just getting this entirely wrong. They are acting as if Donald Trump somehow has a coherent economic theory, even if it's one they disagree with, and they are ascribing to him a economic purpose. This is what Donald Trump is up to. He wants to impose these tariffs because he will then be able to lift them selectively. He wants to be able to impose these tariffs because it will force billionaires to fly their private planes to Mar-a-Lago to say, will you lift it against my business? And he will be able to say, yes, I will lift it for this and not for that. He wants foreign leaders to bend the knee and say, oh, Donald Trump, will you give tariff relief to my country? And it will allow him to say, okay, I'll do this and not that. He wants Republicans in Congress who have debased themselves over and over again to beg for their farmers or to beg for this industry or for that manufacturer. What it does is it allows Donald Trump to be a king. It allows him to destroy the U.S. economy, but aggrandize his sense of self and power. And for the people who don't get this, if you didn't watch him throw the paper towels to people who had just suffered a natural disaster in Puerto Rico. If you didn't watch him minimize and try to extort the people of California who had just gone through wildfires, if you spent the last 8 years not listening to him denigrate military heroes and veterans, then you have learned nothing about who Donald Trump is. He is a cruel human being who does not care about the cruelty. He does not try to impose a rational theory around the cruelty. Instead, it is all about people begging him, people who are desperate sucking up to him, people who are wealthy sucking up to him. And that's what these tariffs are all about.
I think it's the perfect point. The reality is that he is not concerned about the pain that he's going to inflict on people. What he's looking to do is just issue these blanket pardons, knowing that the only way that they get lifted on any entity, any company, any country is if he can on an individual basis get these people to come and grovel at his feet, so that on an individual basis, after they've given something to him, then all of a sudden they could be exempt. Now, the reality is that if he exempted everybody from this, that would be the right thing to do because these tariffs are overall damaging. There is no winner in a trade war, but Trump wouldn't want to do that, even though that's going to be the step that's going to help the most people. His focus here is issuing this blanket harm onto everybody so that on an individual basis, so long as it could benefit him specifically, he'll lift it on companies, on people, on countries that promise him something in return. Right. And so what can we expect to see in terms of what these companies, people, entities, countries are going to be offering him?
Look, just look no further than what he's done so far. The legal industry has been shaming itself over the last few weeks. You had law firm after law firm show up and say, I think the first law firm, Paul Weiss, said, we'll give you $40 million of free pro bono legal services for your cause.
And Trump was like, that was too easy. Let's more than double it.
Absolutely. The next one was $100 million, right? Yeah. And now you've got law firms literally who are not facing any threat by Donald Trump, who are just showing up and offering $100 million here, $100 million there. And it is what Donald Trump loves. And the fact is, it is worse for the legal industry that any law firm does this, and any law firm. It'd be better for the legal industry, honestly, if Donald Trump just imposed these sanctions on the law firms and we went on with business as usual. As terrible as it is to say, it would be better if he imposed these tariffs, as terrible as they are, as devastating they'll be for the U.S. economy, as bad as they'll be for working men and women, as bad as they'll be for the entire international community. Better that he does that than he does that and then exempts one company or another company and creates this system that is not based on anything other than his whim and him bestowing favor.
Is that pro bono work for the government or for Trump himself? It's for the quote unquote government, but it's going to be used by Trump himself. It's for his agenda. I think it specifically and explicitly says it's for Trump's agenda. Like it lists stuff in the pro bono agreements that have been made. It's probably, of this entire administration, it's probably the most blatantly corrupt thing that I think that they've done. That's just like outwardly just like the most corrupt, illegal, horrible thing they've done so far.
But that's what he's going to do, because that is what Donald Trump believes. So the next time someone tells you that Donald Trump, oh, he's doing this because he believes in tariffs, he's always believed in tariffs, that's a bunch of bullshit. Donald Trump no more believes in tariffs than he read Project 2025, all 900 pages of it. He doesn't believe in anything. The only thing he believes in is people showing up, flattering him, and him bestowing beneficence, and in return getting loyalty.
And phone calls.
Well, I think his strategy is backfiring a little bit, because Emmanuel Macron came out and said that this is a good time not to capitulate to Donald Trump, but rather to pause all investment in the United States. And so I think his perception of all of this is probably colored by the fact that he is surrounded by such weak-willed, spineless sycophants that he got it in his head that, oh, everybody's going to cow to me. Everybody's going to grovel at my feet. Look at the people I'm surrounded with, the Lindsey Grahams of the world, the Scott Bessents. And
Can you go over the law firm corruption stuff? Yeah, basically what happened is if you were a lawyer and if you ever worked with like Mueller, people that were involved with the government investigation into the J6 stuff, if you ever worked with any of those people, what Trump does is now he finds those people at law firms, and what he does is he attacks those law firms via executive order. And then the goal is you have to guarantee, you have to agree to give Trump pro bono work so that he stops attacking your law firm. That's what that's the current Trump memery right now. And so far, at least 3 law firms have capitulated to these extortionary activities.
And all of the people in his cabinet, just these groveling sycophants who have taken up collective residence in this guy's colon. And so it distorted his perception of how people actually might have a willingness to fight back. But when you have these other world leaders who aren't super willing to just kind of grovel at Trump's feet, now you've got the beginnings of an actual trade war that are ultimately not going to redound to Trump's benefit and probably result in much less investment into the United States.
Yeah, so I think you're exactly right. What Donald Trump cannot account for is the idea that someone has dignity. Because no one around Donald Trump has dignity. Right? Donald Trump is used to operating in a world of sycophants who have sacrificed every ounce of dignity.
You have to be careful with this line of thinking, and I know, well, I hope, I guess, that this is what the law firms are thinking. It's not about who has dignity or who doesn't when it comes to going along with Donald Trump. It comes down to who has the fortitude or willingness to sacrifice not only themselves, but whatever thing they're representing in an effort to fight against Trump. The reason why Doug Ford's tune has changed so much, or the reason why some countries or law firms are capitulating to Donald Trump isn't necessarily because, even I might even scream this hyperbolic against him, but it's not because they have no dignity or fortitude. It's that when you're making decisions that impact huge groups of people, it's a very difficult decision to make. Like for me, I've said this, that this would be a challenge if I had a media company or whatever, it'd be a challenge for me that I don't mind saying whatever the fuck to people individually, because I don't give a fuck, right? If somebody doesn't like it, if somebody doesn't work with me, that's fine. But that decision becomes a lot more difficult if you have like a company full of people, because now the things that you say or do might impact the jobs of everyone else around you. And especially when you're like the leaders of countries or provinces, well, it's a lot harder to say like, oh, well, fuck it, I'll just say fuck this guy, because you're not just putting yourself on the line, you're putting the entire constituency on the line as well,
as an entrance fee to be in his presence. And so he cannot imagine that there is someone, a world leader, a business leader, an individual citizen who might simply say to him no, not because they're not afraid, not because they don't recognize it'll cause them harm, but because they have decency and they have dignity. They have self-respect. And Donald Trump is miscalculating in this arena, as he usually does when he miscalculates, because there is someone on the other side who says, you know what, my self-respect is worth more to me than the economic harm you can impose. My self-respect is worth more to me.
In the hypothetical world where the Dems have enough seats after midterms, do you think they should impeach him immediately? Yeah, 1,000,000,000%, of course. But, will that actually happen? Who knows? Who knows? Who knows? Who knows?
than the customers you can scare away. My self-respect is worth more to me than the clients who may leave my law firm and go to some others, or that may go to some other television network. My self-respect matters more. And Donald Trump can't even fathom what that's like. Because I'd ask you, Brian, who in his orbit displays an ounce of self-respect? Not J.D. Vance, not his cabinet, not the people who work for him, not Elon Musk. Right? None of these.
Mark, he had Ronna McDaniel changed her name in deference to Donald Trump. She took her own name out of the equation so that Donald Trump didn't have to see the word Romney when he was dealing with it.
Does an impeachment alone do anything to his power? It would remove him from office. Yeah.
Right. And look at the situation he has with the Joint Chiefs of Staff. He replaced his chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, and he replaced him with a guy who he says, and by the way, the guy now has denied it. He says he chose him because the guy sucked up to him and wore a MAGA hat. I mean, this is how he is choosing. This is how he thinks he needs to choose the guy to be the top.
What would be the point? They would never have enough seats to convict. In the Senate, I don't know. I mean, you should do it anyway, though. Fuck them.
A military officer.
I got to say, you know what? Thank God DEI is gone and meritocracy is back.
And look at who he's put in the key cabinet positions. Look at Pete Hegseth. Look at Kash Patel. Look at Pam Bondi. Look at Tulsi Gabbard. Right? I mean,
right. He just found the people whose lips were attached to his ass the hardest, and those are the people who got positions in his cabinet.
Right. So to bring this back to tariffs, this is the problem we face. We now face, which is that he is tanking the U.S. economy. He is raising prices on everyday Americans. He has imposed what will be the largest tax increase in American history, and it is incredibly regressive tax. It will hit the working class much harder than it will hit the rich, because this is basically just an enormous sales tax. That's what this is. This is just a nationwide enormous sales tax. He has negatively impacted people who have saved for retirement, people who have tried to squirrel away money in their 401ks. He is harming them. He is harming our international relations. Our allies now don't trust us. They are forming alliances with China. They are forming alliances around the United States, not with us. So he's harming us in all of these ways because what he wants out of it is an ego stroke. What a desperately pathetic little man he is. What a vulgar human being he is, that he's willing to sacrifice all of this so that people can make him feel important, because down deep inside he knows he is not. Down deep inside he knows he is a fraud, he is a con man, and he is a pathetic human being. But this is what we face right now, and kudos to the people who stand up to him. It's something I try to do in my law practice. It's something you do with your videos, something I do with Democracy Docket, and it is something, frankly, we need a lot more people doing every day.
To that exact point, I think for folks right now who are looking to support the people who are actually standing up, who are actually engaging in fearless journalism, who are actually fighting back against this administration, there's no better group of people than the folks at Democracy Docket. So I'll put the link for Democracy Docket right here on the screen and also in the post description of this video. If you have not yet signed up, please sign up. It's an invaluable resource and supports good people doing good work. Mark, to that point, what is your message for the broader community? Because we have seen, let's say, for example, as it relates to law firms, that even as the Paul Weisses of the world get their due criticism for capitulating to Trump, that there are other law firms who are willing to grovel at his feet and capitulate to him. And so in anticipation of the next batch of people deciding that they're perfectly content to sacrifice their dignity in deference to Trump, what's your message to those people, to those companies, to those entities?
Look, that history is watching you. You know, if you are a wealthy partner at one of these big law firms, you're already wealthy. Okay, your kids and your grandkids are not going to ask you, how you made your money. They're going to ask you in 2025 what you did when democracy was at stake. What did you do when Donald Trump was doing all these things? Did you stand tall? Did you stand up for what was right and wrong? Did you stand up for the rule of law, or did you capitulate? They're going to ask you, if you're a Republican politician, they're not going to ask you, what you campaigned on your last election. They're going to ask, when Donald Trump took over your party, when Donald Trump was destroying working men and women and their savings, what did you do? Did you do anything, or were you just worried about your seat? If you're the president of an Ivy League university, you're used to strutting around the globe, and you're like, I'm the president of an Ivy League university, and we have the best and the brightest, and we educate the best and the brightest, and we do the most important research and think the biggest and most important thoughts. What your children, your grandchildren are going to ask about you, what people will read about you, is not what your budget was for research. They're going to ask, when your university, when education in the United States was under attack, did you capitulate? Did you give Donald Trump what he wanted? Or did you stand up for what you claim you believe in? Right? Did you stand up for the excellence of your universities that you say are vital to democracy? There's a reason, Brian. There's a reason why he has targeted law firms. He's targeted the media. He's targeted universities. Those are pillars of democracy. There's a reason why he's now attacking, of all of the economic systems, there's a reason why he's attacking the trade system, because it is fundamentally a democratizing institution, right? It builds relations between countries when you have trade, right? Countries that have trade with one another are more likely to be allies than they are to be enemies. It helps lift people out of poverty. That's not to say that free trade has not also cost jobs. And there are things that we have to do to protect American workers, for sure, that have not been done. But Donald Trump's not interested in those either. Like, he is fundamentally destroying all of these parts of democracy because it makes him stronger as an autocrat. And people can never forget that that's what he's doing. And if you out there are playing any part in facilitating that, shame on you. And if you are spending any amount of your time and energy fighting it, thank you.
Could not have said it better myself. Again, for those who are watching, to get that exact type of fearless journalism, standing up to the powers that be, this is what you'll get with Democracy Docket. So I'll put the link again right here on the screen and also in the post description of this video. Please go ahead and sign up. Support fearless independent media. I'm Brian Tyler Cohen.
I'm Mark Elias.
This is Democracy Watch.
Cute. Okay, wait. Last video. What is this? Somebody said Elon Musk sounding smart talking about cars.
A test for the future of your business. So tell us, what was it like? What was it? You were in your control room observing it all. What was the experience like?
Well, I mean, it was very nerve-wracking, certainly for the first flight to the space station.
Or was it SpaceX?
It was the third flight of our rocket, of our Falcon 9 rocket. So I wasn't perhaps as worried about that. And we had flown our Dragon spacecraft and maneuvered around and re-entered. So I knew that the spacecraft functionality worked, but we'd not tested the proximity operations and berthing system. And there was a bunch of upgrades to the avionics. So we went from mostly single fault tolerant to being, actually often no fault tolerant to being 2-fault tolerant. So it's quite a big increase in complexity in the avionics and the software. So and we also added solar arrays and a radiator.
And you had to prove all that stuff would work. The arrays would deploy. Yeah. You can't test that on Earth.
Right. You can sort of try to get a close approximation, but you can't get exactly what it's like to be in 0G. Yeah.
So you launched. You got up there. You deployed the solar array, and you had a little bit of a hiccup as you approached the space station. Nothing serious, but what was that like?
Yeah, it was a little worrying at first because the LiDARs wouldn't lock on. So as we approached the space station, we scanned the space station with.
Okay. Cute. Well. Shit's fuck, guys. What do we do?